It is not safe for anyone to be on the streets.
We've approached everything as our job is to get you back on your feet. When you're 65 and you've got several chronic conditions, that is not true.
In 2022, we had 14,000 single women experiencing homelessness.
There's less shelter beds for women than there are for men.
Once you have a criminal conviction in the state of California, there are over 4,800 policies that prevent people from really re-entering their community.
A general assumption that I think is baked into a lot of where we're at in our country and world is that there are just disposable people.
Do you feel that we believe redemption is actually possible?
Fundamentally, yes. I think so. I think the challenge is, what is that redemption?
Homelessness impacts different populations in different ways. In today's episode, we're going to explore the effects of housing insecurity on three different groups of people: those exiting the carceral system, older adults, and unaccompanied women. Chris Freed, our guest for this episode, has a powerful story that speaks uniquely to the experiences of each of these populations. Join us as we talk about homelessness, because there's no issue that's closer to home.
My name is Mark Jones.
My name is Eunices Hernandez.
I'm Amy Turk.
My name is Sofia Herrera.
I'm Eric Ades.
I am Chris Freed. Welcome to Homeland. I'm just going to follow your lead. See where it goes.
Awesome.
We are rolling.
My name is Chris Freed. I work with the Impact Consulting Group. I'm one of the managing partners of that group. I've been working in homeless services for just over 26 years.
Chris Freed and I met in 2018. She is a leader in the homeless service community here in LA and nationally. She's become an incredible colleague who deeply embodies this work. So obviously you're working here in LA extensively. You're also working across the country. If you had to say, okay, these are the top three challenges or problems that I'm seeing when it comes to why the people in that city are experiencing homelessness.
So we're seeing seniors that have worked their entire life that have never experienced homelessness. Their rents have risen so high that it's above what their Social Security is paying. So
there's folks who they've worked their entire life. They are being pushed into homelessness for the first time as a senior.
I have this story that I often tell. I was taking my kids to go see their doctor. And in front of the doctor's office, there was a couple, both seniors, a man and a woman, that were sleeping on a mattress in front. And, doing the work that I do, of course, I had to stop and chat with them and find out what's going on and if there was anything that I could do to get them connected and to assist to get them off of the street. And what they shared with me is that they were in the same apartment in Tarzana for over 20 years, but their Social Security wasn't enough and that their rent had climbed over $2,500, $2,600 a month, which then pushed them out. The first 2 weeks of every month, they rent a hotel room. And then that money would run out. And they would sleep on the mattress in front of the doctor's office because it was on a very busy street. They felt for safety precautions, it was the safest place that they could find. And my heart was breaking because in my mind, I was thinking, they have income, but they didn't know how to get connected to the homeless system. They have never experienced homelessness. They didn't even know a homeless system existed. So they were just trying to figure it out and piece together the money that they did have in order to stay as safe as they could and housed as long as they could every month. Obviously my connection to the agency in that local region followed that and to be able to get them connected. But it was just in my mind, wow, this is not okay. These folks could have very easily been housed. They could have shared housing. There's so many different things that we could have done, but they'd been outside. And obviously the longer they stay outside, the more trauma they incur, right? Yeah. And the harder it becomes to get them rehoused.
Those types of stories are kind of staggering, when folks have been housed for decades, when, there's a certain narrative around what the American dream is. And there's retirement waiting for you at the end. There's this life at the end. And there's so many folks who are reaching that point and that's not what it is.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a question about policy. The homeless population is currently aging.
Mm-hmm.
What are the policy implications of serving an aging homeless population?
It's really different from where we've been.
This is Mark Jones, Policy Director at the University of California, San Francisco, Benioff Homelessness and Housing Initiative.
So the current homelessness system comes into being, right, in functionally late 80s, early 90s, in response to a series of economic collapses that deeply affected particularly the boomer generation, right?
This was the year the recession was supposed to end.
Unemployment has increased. The price index continues to rise. Profits have gone down.
They're calling it the Monday Massacre. By the closing bell, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was in the steepest fall in its 103-year history.
Good evening. I'm speaking to you tonight to give you a report on the state of our nation's economy, and regret to say that we're in the worst economic mess since the Great Depression. Since the Great Depression. Since the Great Depression.
There's a whole body of research, which I will not bore you with, around like how homelessness is actually a cohort phenomenon where the economic conditions at the time that a generation enters the workforce basically establish their risk profile for the rest of their lives.
Wow.
That being said, because our system was designed around this specific cohort that at the time was like 25, right? We've approached everything as our job is to get you back on your feet. Our job is to get you back on your feet. Our job is to get you back on your feet, right? And it maps onto our larger sort of national narrative, right? Which is like bootstraps and you're going to get there, Joe.
Yeah.
Like this kind of like, you know,
individualism,
like,
essentially.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And that is not true when you're 65 and you've got several chronic conditions, 2 of which are disabling. Actually, what we need to be doing is setting you up to age in place gracefully on a fixed income. That's very different from let's connect you to rapid rehousing, get you triaged, some skill development, and then get you connected to employment that's going to, keep you stable for the next 20 years.
Rudy Salinas, I was having a conversation with him once, and the question was kind of like, why is this something that we need to care about? And he said something that I've never forgotten, and he said, well, it's much closer to you now.
We're back at First Friday. You may remember this from episode 1. Every month, a group of staff from homeless service providers and system leaders get together to pause from the work and just be with one another. It's a space of genuine community.
When my grandmother retired and was on SSI, originally at that amount it was, she could pay rent and maybe get by with some cheap groceries in her 70s. But when she was in her 90s, her SSI wouldn't cover even 2/3 of rent.
Mm-hmm. This is Jillian Sadler, project manager for Housing for Health Policy and Planning at the LA County Department of Health Services.
So, that's how things have changed. My mom worked her whole life as a nurse and gets a significant Social Security retirement amount and still is paying more than half of her income in rent. And if she didn't have family to supplement her income to help her with all of the expenses of being a sick, disabled elderly person, then I don't know where she would be.
I'd love to talk to you a little bit about growing up in LA.
Yeah.
You're from here?
Angelenos.
What are some of your strongest memories of home?
I often say that I am a kid of extreme privilege. My dad's side of the family, we're all in the entertainment industry.
Yeah.
Some of the most successful people in the entertainment industry. Arthur Freed, so Singing in the Rain, Wizard of Oz, those types of things. That's my dad's uncle. So I grew up in extreme privilege, up in the hills of Malibu in between Agora and the ocean.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know that people didn't have homes. I didn't know that there was even really poverty in the world because I didn't see it. It wasn't around me. I have memories as a kid of not everything being perfect for sure.
Yeah.
But there was never a fear of not having a house to come home to, not having clothes, not having the ability to eat. So, a sense of security, right, that I had as a young child, just in terms of not knowing that there was any other way of life.
Was there a moment for you when the safety and security that you experienced growing up was put at risk, or there was a shift in your own security within your own housing?
So, story be told, I got caught smoking pot at my bus stop when I was in
and this
8th
was
grade.
when pot was
illegal.
Yeah,
this is back in the day.
Back in the day.
Not a lot of people were okay with that, right?
Yeah.
So my 9th grade year I spent in boarding school up in Lake Tahoe. It wasn't the military school that my mother had hoped it was, although they sold her on it being a military school. It wasn't that. But as you can imagine, a small school with 60 kids, all with resource. all that had been in some type of trouble for the most part. It didn't go so well from there because I was exposed to things I'd never been exposed to, right? So it went from pot into things that were much more dark. And so I left home at 15. I wasn't quite 16 and never went back. I started on a road trip to Colorado where one of my roommates from the boarding school, she was a senior. She had graduated and thought I was going to stay with her and life was going to be great. But as I learned to experience that when you don't have the same level of resource and you don't have the ability to obtain resource, right? I was only 15, so I didn't have ID, couldn't get a job.
Yeah.
I experienced starvation. I experienced not having housing. It was in the winter in Colorado. And I really had never been that scared in my entire life. When I say I was living on a piece of iceberg lettuce with Miracle Whip, I didn't even know what Miracle Whip was before that.
Yeah.
But that was the food that was available to me, and I took it. That started me on a very different road than I was brought up to understand.
What was the relationship like between you and your parents at that point? You're still under 18. What was that dynamic like?
The relationship within our household was such that my mom controlled most things, and my dad, in order to maintain status quo and calm, just went ahead with what she said. So when my mother and I just could not figure out how to live with one another on life's terms, it was, you have to go. And being a kid, I really didn't know what to do.
So you're back in LA after Colorado. You don't go back home though?
Didn't go back home.
Where do you go?
So I made a friend at a guy who worked at a gas station, and he let me stay in the gas stations all night long. So there was a bathroom there, so I had access to a toilet and the ability to clean up. I ran into my dad. My parents would go grocery shopping, and I happened to run into him. And I really needed money. I was hungry. I was dirty. I didn't have clean clothes. But I just had too much pride. And he tried to give me money. And I said, I don't need your money. And I'll never forget this, because it's ingrained in my memory. I took a $100 bill that he handed me, and I ripped it up in front of him in a million pieces and threw it at him. And in the back of my head, all I wanted to do was to just say, I'm sorry, and go home. But I just couldn't. So, on nights when my friend wasn't working at the gas station, I would sleep on a bus bench, and a group of kids stopped by and they were like, what are you doing? Right? I didn't know them. And they invited me to stay in their apartment. And I took them up on that. And they let me stay there for a couple of weeks, which was great. That couple of weeks was what I needed. My dad helped me get an ID. So undercover, he helped me get an ID. I got this job selling copy machines. And
were you good at it?
Yeah, I was really good at it. I learned how to navigate the real world. I was making real money. I was able to get an apartment. I stayed clean.
Yeah.
I wasn't using drugs at that point. It was short-lived. I grew up with such extreme privilege and then had nothing, and then started earning money again.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to manage it. So I had this great apartment. I had this great job. I was making a lot of money. And then I started getting high again. And so once I started getting high again, it very quickly went away, lost my housing, ended up on the streets of Pacoima, and stayed on those streets for a very long time. So I was 17 years old when I hit the streets of Pacoima, and didn't get my life together until I was about 25-ish, in and out of incarceration.
So homelessness used to be thought about mostly in terms of men, and males. And of course, that was 10, 12 years ago.
This is Sofia Herrera, Director of Research, Planning, and Policy at the Hub for Urban Initiatives.
But now we are seeing the numbers for women increase. Single women, particularly, those women who are experiencing homelessness on their own, on the streets. In 2022, we had 14,000 single women experiencing homelessness in LA County. 14,000, 80% of which were unsheltered.
Can I give some numerical context here? Because that number is staggering. So the top 10 cities in the United States in 2023 that had the most amount of homelessness was New York, LA, I think it drops down to Seattle, and then it's San Francisco. Seattle at number 3 had 14,000 total homeless in the city of Seattle. Denver had 10,000 or less. Phoenix, 10,000 or less. We're talking about single women experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles County.
Yes.
More than the top 3 through 10 cities in the United States.
And that is why we need to pay attention.
Can you talk to us about the Unaccompanied Women Project that you all were a part of and some of the aspects of that work?
That actually dates back to 2001.
Here's Amy Turk, CEO of Downtown Women's Center on Skid Row.
And at the time in the Skid Row community, there was one shelter for women, and it closed, citing that women were more expensive than men.
Wait.
Yep.
Hang on a second. That was the reason they closed, was women are more expensive.
I mean, they literally said that, but obviously they didn't have the funding to keep a shelter open. And we were upset at that. We, with other partners in the Skid Row community, including LA Can, we started the Downtown Women's Action Coalition, and we did a needs assessment. And that was so effective to really listen to what are the expressed needs directly from people experiencing homelessness, women in particular. And it became a way to make sure that we were designing programs that met those needs and a policy platform in which to advocate for more policy shifts and resources. And so we've done that assessment every 3 years, growing and scaling it. And the most recent one, when we partnered with Hub for Urban Initiatives with Sophia Herrera and with the Urban Institute with Samantha Batko, we published the largest study to date on the topic of adult women living and experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles County. We don't love the term unaccompanied, that women don't need to be accompanied, but it is a term that HUD coined a while back. What we mean is that majority of women experiencing homelessness, 70% in Los Angeles County, are experiencing homelessness not in a family unit.
With 70%.
70%. And that actually tracks nationwide.
Wow.
So they're disqualified from family programs. There's no extra financial benefit that they could apply for. And there's less shelter beds for women than there are for men, generally.
As you were having this needs assessment and listening to these women, what were some of the things they expressed as, this is what we need?
Number one, housing.
Of course.
In the absence of housing, very basic needs. Access to a bathroom, a shower, storage for belongings so that they could go to appointments and get around town easier. Safety at all levels, especially when unsheltered. Again, 70% of women saying they had been physically attacked while outside. The measures that people take to stay safe at night, just the hypervigilance in that. A lot of women are sort of intentionally isolated so that they're not causing attention on them, and they might stay up at night riding the metro and sleep during the day in a safer park. But unsurprisingly, housing was the number one need.
What did you learn through this process about women who are experiencing homelessness? Here's Sophia Herrera again. She partnered with Amy Turk on the Women's Needs Assessment.
So the number one concern that women had to do with safety, and safety across the board. One of the things that we need to think about is that it is not safe for anyone to be on the streets, regardless of your gender, but it presents more of a vulnerability for women and persons who are transgender and also non-binary. They seem to be more risk of victimization and exploitation.
So you're experiencing homelessness again.
Yeah, but in a very different way.
What was distinct between that experience and the initial experience when you were younger?
I think from the initial experience, I stayed in a neighborhood that I was very familiar with and very comfortable with, to going to a very different community, one that was not very accepting of who I was, for sure.
Yeah.
Came to terms with who I was as a person in terms of my sexuality.
Yeah.
So started living kind of life by life's terms in that regard, and had nothing, like really had nothing. Wasn't going to run into a friend. I didn't have friends that were in Pacoima. It was scary. And at that point, I was so badly addicted that the only thing I cared about at all, ever, was staying high.
Yeah.
And to do whatever I needed to do to stay high.
Yeah.
That was my only mentality. A place to live, I didn't care. I could sleep anywhere at that point. And I had lost all hope. And every time I would think about, okay, I need to stop doing this. This isn't who I am.
Yeah.
The ditch was deeper. I got arrested one more time. How am I going to get out of this, right? I have one more warrant, or I've got this on my record. Now who's going to hire me?
Yeah.
Right? And the things that I did to stay high are things that, normally people like me, right? Or the me that I had the impression of who I was wouldn't do.
Yeah.
And so it became just really overwhelming to come out of. And at that point, I think I had definitely lost the ability to connect with my dad. He didn't want to talk to me anymore. My sisters absolutely didn't want to talk to me anymore. They were embarrassed by who I had become. I was embarrassed of who I had become.
When did homelessness turn into a encounter with the justice system?
Everything that I was ever connected to on the criminal justice side was always about substance use, whether it was my own substance use or my connection to my community.
Was this during the war on drugs? Was this during that period?
100%. My last experience with the criminal justice system, I was offered 18 years. I ended up getting 10. I didn't do 10, thank goodness, because of my privilege. Once again, being able to call upon family members that were lawyers to be able to step in and help negotiate and navigate. I had gone to juvenile hall a few times as a kid. I'd never done more than a week in a juvenile hall setting. Very, very different than being incarcerated in the prison system.
Yeah.
I remember being strip searched. That was awful. And then the orange jumpsuit and the fake Converse. And in my nose, to this day, I can still smell the fake Converse. They smell like dead fish. The other thing that happens when you come from substance use background is that when you are incarcerated, you do two things. If you're an opioid addict, then you're gonna do a lot of throwing up and not feeling very well. But if you're not an opioid addict, then you're gonna sleep. And I mean sleep a lot. Sleep through all kinds of other bodily functions that will occur. You will sleep because you're exhausted from spending weeks and weeks and weeks of just chasing the high. And it didn't matter if it was on the floor. All I wanted to do was go to sleep. And learning again how to navigate, how to stay safe, how to become a chameleon and obtain friends and create a community was all something that I had to learn to navigate. It was survival. It was survival.
Yeah,
and learning
how could it be anything else?
And to be able to not only help yourself be able to survive, but also to be able to look out for other people and hope that other people are looking out for you.
I think one of the things that really resonated with Americans, with Californians in 2020 was the recognition that we were investing a ton of money in our police forces and our prison systems, but we weren't getting what we wanted. We weren't feeling safe in our communities.
Here's Shioni Flegel, Executive Director of Housing California.
One of the kind of pieces of work that had emerged was a real calling for a reinvestment in things that make for safe communities. And housing is one of those things that is a foundation for building community safety and allowing people to thrive in all sorts of ways. So we started looking at what the state spends on the carceral system because we knew that the carceral system was one of the places where people were being released back into the community. They've served their time. They're ready to start a new life, and they're falling into homelessness. And part of that, again, is by design. We've set up programs that limit the ability of someone with a criminal record to access housing. We know there's widespread discrimination in the housing market. If you have a record, it's very hard to secure housing. You're coming out with no job, no resources. So how are you going to pay for that housing? There's
so many barriers.
There's so many barriers. If you've been touched by the criminal legal system, there are so many barriers for accessing housing. But we're spending, what we found when we started looking into that is we're spending at that time $15 to $18 billion a year. Lo and behold, about what we should be spending on affordable housing on our carceral system. That ultimately is not creating the kind of stability and safety we're striving for.
There's a lot of conversations around folks who are exiting incarceration and homelessness. What are some of the barriers to housing that folks who are returning face?
Once you have a criminal conviction in the state of California, there are over 4,800 policies and procedures that prevent you from accessing employment, different licenses,
Wait, did you say 4,800?
4,800 policies, laws, and things like that prevent people from really re-entering their community.
This is Onisis Hernandez, LA Council member for Council District 1.
You can't apply for certain benefits. You can't apply for certain licenses. You know, to be a barber, you have to get licensed. If you were a firefighter inside the jails and prisons, it's very difficult for you to become a firefighter outside, even if you were doing it while incarcerated. So there are different barriers that have been created that have made it very difficult for people to re-enter. Now imagine people without criminal convictions right now in Los Angeles, how difficult it is for them to find deeply affordable housing, to find housing that has mental health services attached to it, or, you know, inpatient drug treatment. That's for folks who don't have a conviction. Now imagine coming out, you're already facing barriers to getting certain housing and certain social services. What are you left with?
When someone is experiencing homelessness and they have a record, what is it that they need?
What they need is housing first options, sober living, housing first programs, really good interim housing, a lot of permanent supportive housing. Mm-hmm. That's what we need to give folks, that is deeply affordable, subsidized, social housing. Yeah. You know, that's what people need, because once someone is housed, then you can begin to address all the other issues that may be occurring.
You know, it's some of the most intuitive things you'd know.
Here's Eric Ades, Director of Housing and Homelessness Policy for LA Council District 1.
They need income. They need resources, right? So they either need a job or some way to have income to pay for the basic needs that they have. So they need food and they need a place to live. Yeah. I would say most of those things are just the needs that everyone needs. They need income. They need a place to live. And I would add to that, I think all humans need some way of making meaning of their world, right? They need something to feel like they're a part of, whatever that is, a job, a passion. They need to feel community.
When did that period of housing insecurity or homelessness come to an end for you?
Very, very simple answer here. When I was looking at 18 years and got offered 10, and I did 2 because I don't know if you're all familiar, but in the state of California, they have a rehabilitation prison.
I've heard of it.
Yep, in Norco. And I was able to get there, and you have to go through treatment while you're in there. And you go in front of the California Board of Prison Parole Committee in order to get out. I had to go in front of that committee, and I'll never forget, I had the toughest commissioner, was mine. Always had to be. I was like, can I just get someone easy? There's so many easy people. Why do I have her?
The hardest road.
Hardest one. And she said to me words that will stick with me forever. I think you've learned a lot, but I don't think you've changed at all. We'll see you. We'll see you soon. And I said, no, you won't. You're not going to see me. I'm not making this mistake again. And I meant it. So I got paroled. And when you parole from that type of sentence, you're on parole for much longer in a very different type of parole. You're not checking in once a month. You're checking in weekly. You're testing all the time. And I really didn't have an address, but this lady that I had lived on her property for a long time in a trailer that didn't have running water or anything allowed me to use her house address. And I promised her I would never bother her. I would never come. And I didn't. But I went back to my trailer, but it happened to be on her property.
Yeah.
And she came over and said, you don't have to live like this anymore. You can come and you can stay with me. And I said, I don't have a job. I don't have a future. I don't have anything. And she said, I believe in you. I believe in you. She was about 82 years old at that time. I'll never forget her. Always brings tears to my eyes because we had a relationship until the day she passed. And she encouraged me to sign up at the local community college. And she sat with me on my first day of classes at the community college. And here I am sitting at Mission College in Sylmar. And I was excited. I was scared.
Yeah.
But I was excited. And in those classes that I enrolled in, they were substance use classes, counselor classes.
Wow.
That really propelled me beyond just continuing my education. It really laid the foundation for the change to begin, because in that particular program, it wasn't about what you were learning per se. Mm-hmm. It was about how are you changing so that you can be there for somebody else. Because if you could work and fix the things that had created issues for myself, right? The things that had caused me to make all the bad decisions that I had made, then you can help lead other people down a positive pathway. And it was at that time, right, during my classes that I was taking at Mission College, that I got hired by a local substance use organization. They brought me in, and they were connected with LA Family Housing. And I got placed to be the substance use counselor at LA Family Housing, where I stayed for many, many, many years, and definitely put me on a very different path.
What has kept us from putting those resources or investing in that community at that particular moment when they're re-entering society?
The pie is the pie, right? There's only enough money to go to things. And so there's just straight up, if you're putting most resources into the inflow, then there's just literally not enough for the outflow. So that is just a fact.
Here's Eric Adas again.
The other complicating factor is a general assumption that I think is baked into a lot of where we're at in our country and world is that there are just disposable people.
You were heavily involved in Measure J in the ballot initiative. Can you talk to us a little bit about what Measure J is, what it was meant to do, and what your involvement in that was?
Yes, so Measure J is an initiative that was put on the ballot at the LA County level in 2020.
Here's Onisis Hernandez again.
That said, we need 10% of locally generated tax dollars to move into pretrial services, mental health and drug treatment, support for our young people, harm reduction services.
This preventative.
Preventative, the vision that we want to see, which is care first, jails last.
My wife says this to me all the time. She's like, you're an anomaly. You always look for the good. No matter how many times somebody burns you, you are still focused on where the good is. And it's not that I'm naive. I've been down this road.
Yeah,
like you
have
can't
personal
come on,
experience.
man.
Yeah.
But I believe that there's good in everyone. And I believe in people just in general. And you could be awful today, but it doesn't define who you are as a person. And so I'm always going to look for the positive in people. And I'm going to continuously look for an opportunity for when that person is ready to be like, let's go. There's a better way. There's a better path. Because I have to tell you that if she hadn't knocked on my little trailer door that day to say, you don't have to live this way, it would have been weeks at the most before I returned, because how was I going to eat? How was I going to survive? And Marilyn was my hero. Like, she stood with me, and I lived with Marilyn for 3 years.
Wow.
And she was there when I graduated. She was there when I got my certificate. And then she was there when I went on to continue my education into my undergrad. And I passed away long before I went into graduate school. But yeah, definitely stayed with me.
Can you describe for us maybe a thought or an emotion when Marilyn said, I'm here, you can stay here with me, like I believe in you? Like, what are some of the
That's
thoughts
crazy.
that are going through your mind?
I'm
after
like, this lady lost her mind. That's what went through my mind. I'm like, do you know who I am? Like, do you know what I've been and do you know what I've done?
Sound like she accepted you.
Yeah, she didn't care. She didn't care because she saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. And, you know, I know through lots of recovery programs, they say, you know, you have others that surround you that believe in you until you can believe in yourself. But she was the living example of that for me. She gave me the sense of self-worth. She gave me the belief that I could make it through the other side, because that ditch that I had dug for myself was so deep that it was scary for me to think about all the things that I was going to have to do to overcome to climb out.
Is there an example of someone that you were able to be Marilyn for?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And can you share a story?
Yeah. So this also might bring a little bit of tears to my eyes, because it's the power of family, right? And how we define family, or who we define as our family. Leaving Marilyn's house, I never rented an apartment. I stayed with Marilyn. I was hired by LA Family Housing.
Yeah.
I saved a lot of money, and I bought my first condo. And I went grocery shopping, and I met an older man that was sleeping outside. So I stopped to talk to him and find out what was going on. He was a senior, and he had just lost his apartment. He had a medical condition. He needed open heart surgery, but no longer had insurance, couldn't afford it. And I continued to talk to him over the next several weeks. Usually I would make the referral into shelter.
Yeah.
But with him, there was something about him. I just connected with him. And I said to him, you don't have to live like this. I have an extra room in my place. And he said, I don't have any money. I said, it's okay. Like, we'll figure it out. And he moved in. I was able to help him get connected to Social Security, get him connected to Medi-Cal. I was able to get him connected to a job at a local hospital. And he ended up staying with us for 9 years. And he was there for the birth of my first 2 kids. With my eldest, he became the picker-upper from school every day, the homework helper every day. He became family. And that's what I mean by defining family. Like, he relied on me as though we were his family, but more importantly, I also relied on him as he was my family. And it wasn't this like, well, you're going to pick up my kid type of thing. And he just became family.
Yeah.
Everybody has their own story, right? People that are experiencing homelessness, sure, there are people that need way more support and way more care. Alan wasn't one of those folks. He needed an opportunity. He needed someone to extend their hand in the same way that Marilyn extended her hand to me. And I did that for him. And I know that when he passed, he didn't pass alone. He passed with a family. We were able to get him reconnected with his mom, who was like 95 years old, and his sister. He died with a family who loved him, around him, and supported him. He didn't die alone.
We have expectations that certain problems will be handled or addressed or fixed by a system. And obviously there are challenges that we face where there are systemic solutions that are needed. The story that you told about Alan isn't that, though.
No.
It is the story of you saying, I experienced hospitality. I experienced someone making space for me. I experienced someone believing in me when I wasn't able to do that for myself. I'm going to now embody all that and extend that to you, Alan. And it's not a systemic solution,
No.
It's a hyper-personal. Can you talk us through, is the solution to the housing insecurity, to the homelessness that we're seeing in Los Angeles, is it systemic? Is it personal? Is it a mix of the two? Well, how do the two interact?
Yeah, this is not a governmental alone problem. This is an everybody problem. We all have to step up and do our part. There's pieces absolutely that the government needs to be able to support. We need a system that works.
Yeah.
So I do believe it's a marriage between the two. I think we need solutions at the government level. We need the support of the nonprofit community, but we also need individuals to step up and say, we can be part of the solution. Whether that's, I'm going to lower rent on the units that I have. I'm going to give somebody an opportunity that doesn't have a rental history, and I'm not going to gouge the prices for that. We're going to give people opportunities. Like, I believe that we as a community need to be able to give back if we're going to have an expectation, because government doesn't own all of the units. And how do you solve homelessness?
Housing.
With housing.
Yeah.
So if we don't have the units, we're not going to be able to get people moving through more quickly. So we need community to step up. We need the faith community. We need the nonprofit community, and we need government. We need it all.
And soon, right, like the majority of people experiencing homelessness will be older.
Here's Mark Dones again.
And when we talk about the system shifting, it's both in like the policy implications around, what we're doing, but it's also in the policy implications around the built space, right? When we set up something for older adults, we think about things like activities of daily living. We think about balance. We think about falls. We want to make sure that things are wider so that folks can get down them with walkers or in wheelchair. Like, there's a whole design element that is separate from program design that we're going to have to start thinking about that for our shelters, for our other kinds of housing options in a way that we just haven't.
We're geared to work with folks that we feel are like, 20 and 30. Let's get you back into employment. We're not doing that anymore. We need to make a system change. How do you do that successfully?
The unfortunate thing about doing stuff is you kind of just have to do it. I hate this because it sounds like just sort of like, the usual consultant language, but you can't manage what you can't measure. So you actually have to say, in 365 days, we will go from X number of spaces that can work with our older adults to Y number of spaces. We will go from X number of programs that are aimed at our older adults to Y number of programs, right? And Y has to be bigger than X.
Yeah. Do you feel like there's fear sometimes in actually like putting a number to it? Because then there's accountability. Yeah. We actually have to do the thing.
100%. I mean, accountability is terrifying in any kind of system work, particularly when there's a lot of public scrutiny, because you could fail, right?
You could. Yeah.
But I think the important thing about failure in public work in general is, unless 365 ends and X is still X, you did do something. We should set ambitious goals and we should fail because the goal was ambitious.
What are the goals that this sector needs to set for itself and then fail ambitiously at, in your opinion?
I mean, I think we should be really saying like zero unsheltered homelessness. None.
Wow.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
it is an abomination that we force people to live outside by failing to provide adequate shelter, adequate program response to needs that have been well documented for the last 10 years, 15 years by researchers both at UCSF but also other places. I think we just really need to be saying, like, no one lives outside. That is not a thing that we will allow to be acceptable. Let's say when we get to the end of the period of time we set for ourselves, we've only cut unsheltered homelessness in half. That's better than we've ever done.
Yes.
You joined the work, right? You had this personal experience and then you worked for one of the largest homeless service providers and housing providers here in LA County. How did your experience, both as a provider, but also as someone who had that personal experience now working for a provider, what was that relationship like? How did one inform the other as far as like how you supported people who were still experiencing homelessness, but also how you communicated to the system and said, I personally experienced this, maybe we can do better. Like, what was that relationship like?
Yeah. So when I first started, people knew. But over time, everyone at that organization had changed over. Nobody knew. And I stopped sharing. And I stopped sharing because, unfortunately, when you start talking about having lived experience, people started looking at you a little bit differently. And the trust level wasn't the same. And so I didn't talk about it for years. And it probably just the last, 7 or 8 years, I've given tidbits.
Yeah.
I haven't shared exactly what I've shared with you today.
Yeah.
To this extent, because I still fear that even though I'm now seen as someone who knows what I'm talking about, who has a really deep level of understanding of both the system and the ancillary services that need to be paired with it and all the different communities I'm able to speak to and such, like I still fear in the back of my head and have actually seen it where people start discounting you as, like they don't really understand. They don't really understand the system at large. So for me, I've only started talking about it more recently because I think it is really, really important for us to give people with lived experience, not only an opportunity and a place at the table, but to coach and mentor them because they can be the people that are leading the system. And I think I'm an example of that.
If there's one takeaway that you would want someone who is hearing this conversation, someone who's spending an hour plus with Chris Freed about your story, about your perspective, what's one takeaway you'd want someone to walk away from a conversation with you with?
Yeah, never judge a book by the mistakes that they've made in their past, for sure. And provide people always with an opportunity to believe in themselves. And we can solve homelessness. That's the other thing I would say. It is solvable.
Every experience of homelessness is unique to the person or group experiencing it. For those re-entering society from the carceral system, targeted policies have created barriers to housing and employment, making homelessness almost inevitable. For older adults, rising prices and inflation have pushed many to the streets at a time in life when they've already exited the workforce, are on a fixed income, and are preparing for retirement. For unaccompanied women, homelessness often results after an experience of intimate partner violence when the closest of human relationships breaks down. Now, while there is important work being done to better understand the unique needs of each of these populations, significant work remains to bring women, returning citizens, and older adults home. On our next episode, Make Me a Believer, we explore the role communities of faith have played in addressing homelessness, both past and present. All that and more next time on Homeland. We want to invite you to join the Homeland by subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts. For more information on how to gain a deeper understanding of homelessness, visit ourhomeland.us. For additional content, photos, and more resources on how you can join the work of bringing people home. Homeland was created by myself, Ben Kay, and Fulcrum Productions, in association with Astoria. The complete series is brought to you by United Way of Greater Los Angeles and distributed by PRX. This episode was written and produced by Ben Kay, Andrew Didway, and Daniel Jeter. Marketing, additional production, and photography by Jared Beasley. This episode was edited by Daniel Jeter. Our original music is by Jeffrey Emerson Geyser. Episode artwork by Philippe Martinez. Our social media manager is Veronica Roy. The Homeland podcast consulting crew is Marisol Bayo, Jerry Jones, Hazel Lopez, and Barbara Olson. Members of the Homeland Advisory Committee for this episode are Shannon Murray, Janine Solorio, Omar Gutierrez, and Suzette Shaw. I would like to say thank you to all those who helped us along the way and ultimately brought this project to life. This episode is dedicated to the Homeland Advisory Committee. Thank you for your time, your voice, and helping inform every one of these episodes. Shannon Murray, Sean Morrissey, Dexter O'Connell, Brad West, Reba Stevens, Tony St. James, Janine Solorio, Jeremy Goldstein, Omar Gutierrez, Tiffany Duvernay-Smith, Suzette Shaw, Allison Crosby, Amara Inaniwu, Hazel Lopez, and Taya Heisel. Thanks for listening, folks. Let's keep talking.